Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, following the 3 H's of the channel and all that good stuff. And in this video, I have a lot of wild encounters for you. They're all scary in their own way. So, if that sounds like something that you're interested in, definitely pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. Earlier into my teenage years, me and my friends loved to hang out in the forest. We used to hang out by this specific creek that was on my friend's property. We were going out to chill there, but he had to finish dinner first, so he told me he would meet me there with some other friends. So I'm just relaxing by the creek, sitting there and waiting for my friends to show up. I hear a rustling. I think it's just typical forest noises. A squirrel or a chipmunk can make a lot of noise if you don't know. It seems to get more hurried and louder. And by the time that I actually go to look, it's a really tall person. And I'm talking very tall. His eyes are black and his skin is bone white. I try to run away, but he grabs me. He's tugging on my arm and I'm trying to pull away. Every time that I try to break away, he grips harder. I begin to scream and kick. My sleeve gets torn off of my shirt, and that's what I remember until all of a sudden I am running down the trail, crying, running. My friends run into me. They tell me they've been looking for me for over an hour. I'm inconsolable. We go back to my friend's house. They call the police. They search the whole area. They can't find the guy, or any trace of him for that matter. Upon reading other people's encounters, I remember hearing stories about some kind of underground cave, but I've never found it, nor do I know many people who have. I can't go into that forest anymore at all. Anytime I get near it, I have nightmares and I get woozy, and then it's just a bad time. The long and short of this is that I've seen someone turn into an animal. I used to go spend the night at my great-grandmother's house, which is just right down the street from where my grandmother lived. I woke up in the middle of the night for some reason. I don't exactly remember why. I think I had to go to the bathroom. I noticed that the motion detecting floodlight is on out back. This is not a big deal. Deer activate it all the time. But I can't fall back asleep for some reason. Just the whole vibe is off. So I sit there playing my Game Boy by the light out back so I don't have to turn on the light, and then my great-grandma would come in and harass me into getting back into bed. My Game Boy was one of the old ones that didn't have a backlight in it. I still feel this really strange need to look out the window. I climb up on the chest thing that's under the window to the side yard and I look out. I see a short young man who's in his late teens, possibly early 20s. He's in a tan Carhartt looking outfit. He's staring at a tree in the side yard. I just watch him. He seems to be looking at one of the younger pines we have. He's tugging at the branches, lifting them up and looking around them as if he's trying to find something. Eventually, he straightens up and looks around. He eventually makes eye contact with me through the window. He sees me looking at him and he looks startled, pretty much terrified. Then he pitches to one side and looks like he's going to fall. But instead of falling, I swear, he turns into a deer and runs off. I told my great-grandma about it the next morning, but she didn't believe me, not a bit. It really weirded me out to see deer on our property after that. I've told this story before, but here goes. My wife is Cherokee, and we were visiting her hometown, and that's when this happened. We decided to visit her old homestead. It was kind of a half farm, half swamp type property that sits along the river. My wife was playing with a Medusa's head of baby snakes, while I was walking around the top of a levee along the river. I get this primal sense of dread all of a sudden, out of nowhere. I get having these terrible thoughts about death. What if I fall? What if I fall into the water from the top of the levee and die? What if my wife is bitten by a snake? My vision starts to go dark around the edges. I'm getting tunnel vision on a perfectly normal, overcast day. I think, this isn't like me at all. I don't worry this much, not about anything. And suddenly, the dread is gone. My vision is normal. At the same time, something takes off from the levee, just out of sight from the base of it. It's a huge blackbird. It takes off flying across the river and drops behind the tree line of an island near the other side. In context, we have been watching eagles fishing at the locks, disturbing greater and lesser blue herons, and I used to work with birds, some of the largest wingspans in North America, the California condor, golden eagles, and this thing was at least 30% larger, and the profile was all wrong. Finally, I see what's wrong with it. It has thick, humanoid legs, still black, still feathered, but humanoid. The only way to describe it was Reggie the Crow from the old Bloody Roar fighting game without the pants. After it's out of sight, the last whispers of dread that I didn't even feel until they were gone leave me. I run back to my wife. She has had stuff happen on her land before. She thought that I got too close to the burned out shell of a farmhouse and I had seen something in the wreckage. She knew something was off as I ushered her into the car. She didn't fight me on it, and we left. This wonderful woman gave me time to defrag rather than pushing me for details in the moment. After a few minutes, and then I calmed down, I gave her the details, and she tells me that what I saw was most likely a raven mocker, a shaman who can turn into animals, a skinwalker. I had encounters with what may be a couple entities in my life. When I was in high school, me and a friend were walking home through a small valley. It's basically a grazing area for horses, and it's fenced off except for a gravel path that runs through it. It was pretty late, but the moon was bright, and we were just walking along like we always do. Suddenly, my friend freezes and stops talking. I wonder for a second. I start scanning the surroundings, and then I see it. A black figure, what almost looks like wearing a robe. It's a good 3 meters, or 10 feet for Americans, tall. It's standing about 4 meters to our left, behind the electric fence. We stare at it, expecting it to move. It's standing completely still. A feeling of terror and dread rushes over me. We start to back up, completely synchronized. That's when something weird happened. Our vision started to get a little weird. It almost looked like things were going dark. Not like at night, but as if you're about to pass out. And then it looked like that the light was bending around whatever or whoever this was. It was menacing. We just gunned it and sprinted until we were almost actually passing out. We went out there the next morning to check, but there was nothing there, not even an impression in the soft soil. Now this second time isn't scary, it's more sad. Me and a group of friends were walking home from our local youth center. It's a place you go after classes to chill. It was snowing pretty heavily, so we thought that it would be funny to climb the local water treatment plant and roll down it. Water treatment plants where I live, Northern Europe, are bunkers that are covered in grass. I'm the third person that reaches the top. I notice the other two are just standing there, staring at something. I get up to my feet to have a look. I see a woman standing on the edge, looking into the pitch black forest. It's like minus 10 degrees Celsius out, and she's only wearing a white dress. One of the others yell, "Who are you?" She doesn't do anything. Someone else asks again. She turns around, and it's a beautiful woman. We ask her if she needs help. She says we can't help her, and then she literally disappears right in front of us. We never felt any evil from her. It was pure sadness, but it was still really scary for us. I never did find out if there was a local story that might explain who she is, but both of these occurred in Northern Europe, if that helps at all. I worked as a CNA through college in a few rundown nursing homes. We had a lot of traveling nurses and not much to do at night, so I always made a point to ask about anything weird that happened to them. This is short, but it was something that one of my friends told me. It was in the dead of the night at a hospital back in the 90s. A man was brought in by police. He's been wandering around the city, screaming incoherently. They think it might be a manic episode or a bad drug reaction. It's strange because the guy doesn't fit the type. His clothes are super nice, more expensive than some of the richer people that come in here, and he has very good hygiene. The cops hand over the guy to the nurses, and he immediately calms down. The screaming becomes more of a chanting, then almost like a talking. A couple of the more religious nurses believe he's speaking in tongues. None of the nurses can figure out what's wrong with the guy. They call the ER resident doctor. The resident is from Saudi Arabia. He comes out of the office on the floor. He stops and listens to the patient talking for about 30 seconds. He goes pale and then turns right around and goes back to his office. The nurse telling the story goes to him and tells him to get his shit together and asks him what the hell he thinks he's doing. The resident doctor says he's not going near that guy. The patient, to him, isn't speaking in tongues. He's speaking in Arabic, and he's talking to a demon. Almost as soon as the resident is done telling her this, the guy starts losing it again. Eventually, he's put into a padded room after telling several nurses and patients deadpan, "I'm going to kill you and eat your eyes." Every time somebody would enter the room, he would begin to fight like a caged animal. He had to be sedated by security. A few days later, when he came out, the guy was apparently the nicest guy you could ever meet, but he had no idea where he was. He had no recollection of the past few days. He wasn't even from the city, and he didn't speak a word of any other language besides English. The part that got me was when one of the more religious nurses mentioned that it was super strange how a native Arabic speaker could hear him in Arabic, but a religious nurse thought he was speaking in tongues. She brought up Acts 2:6. What if they were both right? Acts 2:6 says, When they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken. This was one of the scariest things that I've ever heard. This happened in 2013. I was doing some kind of internet camping challenge. I missed out on doing it in the summer, so I had to do it in the middle of the winter, which it's Florida winter, so it doesn't really count as winter. I set up my camp, and I only have a 50-pound recurve bow and a double-barrel shotgun with me, or as I like to call it, my double bubble toil and trouble shotgun. It's in the middle of this old clearing. Usually, it would be occupied with tents, but the harsher winter has warded everyone off that year. Everybody except me, that is. I get a good fire going. I pull out a pamphlet on the area that I'm camping at. The pamphlet literally says that the Native American translation was silent or noiseless, quiet, sneaking hills, literally called Silent Hills. I had a bit of a nervous laugh, and then it was right around nighttime, so I decided to turn in for the night. I sleep with my shoddy by my side. It's a very uneventful night, but it was insanely quiet, which that time helped me fall asleep better. I wake up. The warm sunlight dances on the ground. Everything seems to be right copper. Then, I notice the clearing is a perfect circle. This is strange, because I could have sworn that it was more of a pear shape when I set up camp. I turned to the right to walk further in a woods when I noticed something off-white dangling from a branch. It's a skull. I was a bit weirded out, but I wasn't scared. Coyotes are pretty common here. I turned to the right. Another skull. I repeat this, and I realize very quickly that there are coyote skulls everywhere. I retreat to the center of my camp. The coyote skulls are clearly visible in all directions. I think, how did I miss this? I clutched my shoddy a little tighter. I returned to the tent. I guzzled down some homemade tea. I used some safe-to-eat tea leaves that I found around the campsite to calm my nerves a little. I was feeling a little braver after this. I walked back out to look around some more. I enter detective mode and look at the skulls again. I noticed that by the wear on their teeth, or the lack thereof, that they were 8 to 14 months old. I decided to take them all down. Having their hollow eye sockets stare at me like that was kind of spooky. By the time I finished screwing around, it's dinner time. I did bring some food with me in case I didn't feel like going out to hunt. I used some spices that I found in the woods to give it flavor. I knew they weren't toxic. However, I did forget that they were also used as laxatives. But since this is a creepy story and not a I crap my pants story, I won't go into detail. I clean myself up and I return to the tent to sleep. I wake up a little while later. It was right around midnight. There's loud yaps and rustling coming from all directions, everywhere. I grab my bow and shoddy. I carefully peek out through the tent opening, and immediately I'm pushed back into my tent with white snapping jaws that were inches from my face. I use a broadhead to stab whatever's on me. It goes down like a ton of bricks. I pull out my cell phone to use it as a flashlight. It's a friggin' coyote. The broadhead went straight through its throat and out the top of its head. The yaps and barks are getting louder and closer. It's an adrenaline high. I blast randomly through my tent opening. I'm not sure if I hit anything. I was too occupied with reloading. There were so many of them. They were started to come into the tent. I would shoot, reload, shoot, and reload. I'd do this until I'm out of buckshot. I say a quick prayer and grab my bow. As I reach over for it, a sharp pain strikes my wrist. I'm too wide-eyed to do anything. The coyote that I literally stabbed with a broadhead is biting my right hand. He leaps on top of me. Luckily for me, the arrow stuck in his head keeps him from coming close to my face. I'm hysterical. I'm screaming for help, saying, "Why won't you die, you damn thing?" Just then, I remember that I brought along an XXL balisong for shits and giggles. I use it to chop the thing's head off. I run out of the tent. I accidentally grab my shotgun instead of my bow. I'm spinning around to try and find a way of escape. Suddenly, the yapping stops. The coyotes are backing up to a campfire, but it wasn't my campfire. Above the blaze floated a coyote skull with feathers strewn about it. I noticed quickly that it's not actually floating, but instead is being worn as a mask by a naked man with pitch black skin and covered in paint. I scream, infuriated at him. I think I was trying to curse at him. I jerk the trigger on my shotgun, and to my surprise, it goes off. His shoulder flinches back, and he grabs his stomach. And this is when something terrible happened. He pulled open his stomach, and this gut-wrenching feeling of anxiety poured over me. Something akin to the sound of a cannon or lightning started going off, but it was way too prolonged to be a rifle or something like that. I think of it today as more like a deafening yell or a scream. I woke up later in a ranger station. They said they received a call in the middle of the night. Someone kept screaming, "Damned bee, coward," into the phone. They patrolled all around until they found me at my campsite. I was covered in bites, not from coyotes, save for the one on my wrist, but rather something more like a human. The wounds were too marred to judge accurately. They were really mad at me. They thought that I went coyote hunting and got myself hurt. The second campfire at the site was stacked to the height of a man with coyote bones. I'm not allowed to go there anymore, but even if I could, or even if I wanted to, I don't think I will ever again. So, what'd you think of those encounters? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. And, if you would like to, in the description below is a PayPal and a Patreon that you can donate to if you want to support the channel that way, but no pressure though. And one thing I will say about the one where the guy was seemingly speaking two different languages at the same time, or they heard it as two different languages, that's straight up just creepy as hell, isn't it? Although hospitals in general are like a hotbed for that kind of stuff, I've had my fair share of bouts in the hospital, and I'll tell you about more of a wholesome experience I had in a hospital. When I was a kid, I don't know how many would remember it now, but the Norwalk virus was going around. I'm not sure if it was called that in every other country, but that's what we called it. And I'm quite sure that's what I had. And I caught it right around Easter break, and I was super sick, like basically dying. And then at some point, I don't remember the chain of events, but it was explained to me that there was so much of a pressure buildup on my sinuses that blood vessels in my nose and face exploded, and blood just started draining out of my nose, and we couldn't get it to stop. And it was getting to the point where I was like gonna pass out from blood loss. It was everywhere. My mom calls the ambulance in a big panic. They take me to the hospital and stuff, and I have like an awful fever. And I'm in this room, and then I was taken out to the hallway, and then I was in this room again. And when I'm in this room, the doctors are telling my parents, like, what the possibilities are. And if I remember right, there was, like, a possibility that I just wasn't going to make it because my fever was way too high. I had lost so much blood, and it was just the whole thing. And then this weird thing happened. Somebody came in the door. It was an older man. He was a doctor, but he was an older man, and he wasn't wearing the same uniform as all the other doctors. And he had this, like, almost glow about him. He came in and talked to me and asked me what was wrong, and I told him I was nervous around strangers, but I still told him because he was a doctor. And he just kind of made this noise and then talked about how rough of a time I must be having and stuff like that. Then he told me to lay down, so I laid down and put my head back. Again, I'm having like an awful fever, I have awful sinus problems, there's like blood still coming out. Every time that I lay back down, I'm like puking out blood and everything else. And then he looks at me and he puts his hand on my forehead, and I don't know, his hands were super cold, but it felt good. And then he took his thumbs and he started at the bridge of my nose and went to the sides in like a kind of a sweeping motion, and it got super tingly, like the same kind of feeling as when your foot falls asleep. It got like that, and then I could all of a sudden breathe through my nose. Now, that being said, it really hurt because I had all that damage done to my sinuses and stuff. And it's the weirdest thing, right at that moment, my fever broke. And the man patted me on the shoulder and said, "Now, you got a long life ahead of you, don't you, son?" And I nodded, and I was still just in awe at everything. And the guy left. And then when the other doctors and nurse came back with my parents, they saw that I was, like, better. Now, they thought that it might have been like the calm before the storm, like, you know how you can feel better just before you turn for the worst, but that didn't happen. I just got better. And when I asked them about the older man, the older doctor, they had no idea who I was talking about. They were like, "There's nobody in here that looks like that at all. There's not even any doctor here over the age of 45. And this guy was old." So, yeah, that's a super weird story from when I was a kid at the hospital. I had my own little Easter miracle, I guess. But if you enjoyed the video, then consider liking and subscribing. And I'll put a couple videos up here so that maybe you can watch one of my other videos. See if you can find something that you like. Anyways, thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.